All right, everyone, welcome to the second module for this week, second session. Let's start getting into virtual reality, and we're going to talk about what is virtual reality as like a concept in terms of technology. We'll also talk a little bit about the history and kind of the important people involved in it. I'm working from the slides from today. You can find the slides here, right there, where it says what is VR. I also have some videos for some of the things I'm going to show out. You're not, I would suggest watching them. A lot of them are some VR pieces that were recorded. There's some other sort of related articles and things that, are relevant to what I'm talking about. So there's this article that you guys actually, I'm going to have you guys read as a discussion question. It's by Brenda Laurel, who we're actually going to talk about in terms of key people in the history of VR, and talks about what is VR, what is VR and what's not VR. Okay. So, in other words, like, if I play a video game on my TV, is that virtual reality? I mean, you can play a 3D video game, right? Is that virtual reality? If I, use Pokemon Go, is that virtual reality? Or if I, there's different experiences you can have. You can be in a room and there can be projections on multiple walls. Does that count as virtual reality? So this article kind of goes over, at least in her opinion, and she's a credited source. She was, a founding person in terms of virtual reality. What at least Mrs. Laurel thinks virtual reality is. Let's kind of go over some of those concepts. Oops, I accidentally deleted it. Right. Oops. All right. So some of the things that she lists as, at least in her opinion, what makes something virtual reality as opposed to maybe like a 3D game, like, like an arcade game. There's a couple of things she lists. One of them is there has to be total immersion. And part of that total immersion is what she refers to as first person perspective. We'll talk about what that means. She also talks about spatialized audio, what that means. A surround environment. Something that's what it's referred to as depth perception and spatialized audio. Natural gestures. And the ability to interact with the environment. These are some of the things that she lists as, at least in her opinion, what makes something virtual reality. So, one of the first that she talks about is the idea of immersion. Okay. And so what that means is like, you know, when you wear, if I play a video game, like on a computer and a TV, I'm seeing the world, but I'm also seeing the area around the world, right? you see past your television to your wall, or, so it's not a total immersion kind of area. So, this is why something like a video game may not, count, because if you're viewing it on your laptop or on a TV, it's probably not completely immersive situation. Another thing that she kind of points up is that the view of the world should always be first person. Okay. So the idea here is that you are viewing the world through your eyes, not through the eyes of an avatar. Okay. So there are, there are games where you look at things as first person, but some games have avatars where you're playing as a character, right? This wouldn't count because, it, as she sort of explains, it kind of it breaks the illusion. You can't pretend you're in an immersive environment if you're sort of having an out of body experience, so to speak, meaning you're sort of viewing someone else doing the activity. So the idea is, in virtual reality, at least according to her, you are doing all the activities yourself. Okay. You're picking up an object, you're walking through the world, that sort of thing. Um, another thing that she talks about is this idea of complete surround environment. Now, what that means is that the user should be able to move around. Like, I should be able to move my body if I want to. Uh, and the world should move with me. Okay. So in other words, like if I'm wearing a headset and I'm viewing, let's say, for instance, when I look through the headset, I'm viewing a window or some sort of object. When I move my actual physical body like this, um, the my I should change my viewpoint. Does that make sense? Like in other words, like if you play a video game, this is a top-down view. Here's you, here's the screen, right? If you turn your head this way, you're no longer looking at the screen. If you're in a 3D environment, the idea is, okay, well, there's an object over here, but if I change my gaze this way, I should be looking at a different area completely, okay? So, whether I move, turn around, tilt my head up or down, I should be able to view a different aspect of the world. Okay. This is why just playing a video game wouldn't really count as virtual reality, because the TV doesn't move with you. There used to be a device, we'll talk about it, called the Virtual Boy, which was a game system, and it was immersive in that it was like in front of your eyes, so it was blocking out all the rest of it, but it wasn't moving based on head movement. So in other words, if I looked this way or this way, I still got exactly the same view. It's kind of like those old school plastic Viewmasters where it's like it doesn't matter where you put your face, you're still seeing the same image. Okay. Um, so there's another area of 3D is this idea of depth perception or stereoscopicness and parallax, okay, which is how we view things in real life. So this exploration of stereopsis began in the 1950s. And if you've ever seen those like really old school, like, these like black, red and green, or sorry, not red and green, red and blue glasses, right? Um, this is the old school version of 3D. And so this has been going on for a while, since like the 1950s. Actually, even predates that. There were devices back in the late 1800s that would try to create this sort of faux illusion of 3D. But it's something we've always been trying to do. One of the first quote unquote 3D movies was called Bwana Devil, which I think was a documentary. It was set like a sort of African like safari type situation. Some other ones, House of Wax, Creature from the Black Lagoon, are some popular sort of, cheesy, hokey 1950s kind of movies, monster movies. They were filmed in 3D, and people would wear the old school red and green or red and blue glasses to kind of create the illusion of 3D. So, you have to understand how humans view things. Okay, so here's what I want you to do. Okay, I have this purple line here. And what I want you to do is look with both eyes, assuming you have vision in both eyes. And I want you to close your left eye, as I'm doing, and I want you to close your right eye. Now it's very slight, but you might notice that this appears to move a little bit to the right or to the left, depending on which eye is um, closed. And the reason for that is when you view things, you're actually viewing two versions of the same object. The way that it works is that you have two eyes and they're both perceiving an object, but from a slightly different perspective, right? Because one's coming this way, one's coming this way. And then what happens is your brain puts them together to form this kind of the final object. Okay. Now, in a movie or a TV show, we don't see two perspectives of the same objects. We just see one, whatever the camera is, which is why they don't appear to be 3D. The way that it worked in these old school 1950s VR or not VR, sorry, 3D movies. The way that it worked is that they would take the image and actually overwrite it with, so for every one image, there were actually two parts, one in red and one in blue. And then actually, because one of the glasses was blue, the blue would knock out the blue image and the red would knock out the red image. And so your eyes were getting two versions of the same image from a slightly different perspective. And that's why they looked 3D. The newer versions, the optical ones you guys maybe have seen in theaters, is a little different, but it kind of works on the same principle. Okay. Another thing that creates depth. So in VR, what actually happens is, the way that a VR is constructed, you can see that there's actually one, two displays. Each one is over your eye. And so when you're actually viewing the world, you're getting a slightly, I can't take it apart, but if I could, and we could see both side by side, you would see that if you're looking at a 3D object, that you're getting two versions of the same object, one from slightly different perspective, and then your brain is putting that together to form the 3D object. Okay. Another technique that we can take advantage, or that VR takes advantage of, is known as parallax scrolling. Okay. What that means is that when things are in motion, I should have planned this out. I'm apologizing, but let's do, I don't know, view from moving train. Okay. I don't know if that's real or not. I guess it's fine. So let's, in this particular piece of footage, I think looks like they're moving. I don't know where they're moving from, but anyway, here's this footage, right? And this is, I'm assuming this is real, it's HD. And the way that it works is that when you view things with a long distance, things in the foreground tend to move faster than the things in the background. Okay. And so really there's kind of this foreground, there's this middle ground, and then there's kind of this background, which is the mountains and the clouds here. So watch, I can go frame by frame. So let's try to follow this. There's that. Oops. Here's what I want you guys to do. Follow this line here. This is like a platform, and there's some cord. Watch how I go forward 1 frame and then another frame. So this is like gone after 4 frames, right? But notice how this hasn't really moved at all, this background, right? And then here's where watch my cursor here. I don't know if you can see my cursor in this recording, but like watch this building. It is moving, but not nearly as fast as like this is moving, right? So that this is actual footage. And so the way that it kind of works is, and I made a little kind of animated GIF to kind of show you. This is what this would look like. It's not share, but see how this has no parallax scrolling? And it's not wrong, but it doesn't feel quite as natural. Whereas this one, notice how the foreground is moving much faster than the background. So that's what we call parallax scrolling, okay? This kind of actually goes back. There were some games, early arcade games in the 70s and 80s, or not 70s and 80s, but at least in the 80s that took advantage of this. So like usually the way it works for the way that they kind of accomplish this is they kind of break up the foreground and the background into separate layers, and they kind of move them at different speeds to kind of create this effect. Moon Patrol in 1982 is considered one of the first arcade games that kind of did this. Another one of the same year was called Jungle Hut. So I'll show a real quick clip of that. So you can see here, like the foreground is moving much faster than the background. See, and this is kind of moving a little faster than the foreground, or sorry, a little slower than the foreground, but not as, but faster than the background. Okay, so this has parallax scrolling on it. For this one, see how like the foreground is moving much faster than like these here. So like that's the parallax scrolling, okay, that I was talking about. Oops, that's the Atari version. Better in the arcade version. There you go. So here it's like this moves faster than this to give that kind of parallax scrolling. Okay. So that's what parallax scrolling is. We can do that in, VR, is that the foreground can move faster than the middle ground and faster than the background. Spatialized audio, what that means is that in real life, audio happens all around us. Maybe there's a baby crying in front of me. Maybe there's an explosion behind me. Okay. Unless you have surround sound in your house, when you watch TV, the sound comes one way, right? It comes towards you, right, from the front. That's not how things really work in real life. So to create the sense of realism, um, we kind of say there should be spatialized audio. And what that means is that inside of your device, usually there's multiple, there's multiple speakers. And so in the speaker, it's like, okay, well, let's say this is you and you're looking forward. You could have sound happen here or here or here or here. And that creates a much more realistic kind of environment as opposed to like a TV show, like a TV or a movie theater where it's like the sound is probably only coming forward, that kind of thing. So the idea is like sounds coming from all directions. Another thing is called naturalized gesture and movement. What this means is that the things you do in virtual reality should feel natural. So what I mean by that is like, if you're playing a video game and, let's say in the video game, to pick up an object, you hit the A key, right? That's not natural. People, when you're in real life and you go to the grocery store and you try to pick up an apple, you don't hit like a key on a joystick. You just go and you grab it, right? So me grabbing, that's a natural gesture. Me hitting like a key on my keyboard or whatever, that's not natural, so to speak. That's not how humans normally, do things. This is kind of a sticking point for some people because to be perfectly honest, most VR headsets don't usually have natural gestures. I mean, even the ones you guys are going to be using have controllers. They're not as natural. You can still move them around in 3D space, and that will be tracked, but you can't necessarily grip and things like that. There are input devices that do that. Those are called data gloves. But those are usually very expensive, and most VR setups don't typically have those. Another thing I wanted to talk about, we talked about the idea of movement, is that you should be able to move all around. So as I mentioned, there's this idea of movement. So we talked about the concept of like total immersion, but surround environment. So there's this idea of like you should be able to look all around. So, if I'm sitting here, these are called 3 degrees of freedom. I should be able to look to my left, to my right. I should also be able to look up and down. So basically think about like when we were in 3D programs having the X, Y, and Z rotation axis is essentially. And I can kind of do this too. So just like that. Those are the three sort of viewpoint perceptions, but also I should be able to move forwards, backwards, left, and right. Okay. So I'm going to show you guys a example of, this is a 3D video. In 3D video, you basically use a special kind of camera that basically records in all directions. Okay. This is one where they're going underwater, right? So it's very pretty. I recommend watching it. And actually what's kind of fun is I'm allowed to like look around, so I can actually move around while this is going. I'm moving around, basically in the, what's usually the y-axis. I can also look up and down, so I can look up and I can look down. Okay. And I can kind of tilt my head like this, and oh, look, there's a cute little, um, turtle here. But the problem is I'm not really able to move forward, backwards, and left. I am moving, but that's because the video itself is moving. Okay. I'm not allowed to actually move forward, backwards, left, or right. So in other words, like if I wanted to say, for instance, like swim this way, I can't do that because this isn't a VR experience. It's a 3D video, and that's what kind of separates the two. If I wanted to, I don't know, maybe there's like something cool down here. Like, I don't know, maybe I want to swim closer to the turtle. I can't do that because there's no sense of movement. There's another fun one that I don't, it's a 3D spacewalk, which is very fun. Well, so once again, it's like, okay, I kind of call it the sort of, I call these kind of experiences sort of I call them, amusement park rides because it's like you're sort of on the ride. Like if you're in a roller coaster, you sort of follow the track until you're done. That's kind of what's happening here. It's like you're following a track, so it's like you always start off here inside of the, this astronaut thing, and then you always move out. Like this, and like I'm allowed to look around in all directions, which is totally cool, don't get me wrong, but it's not true kind of virtual reality in that sense. So I'm like looking around. I guess this is done by a Canadian group, and obviously it's like fun to look around. Ooh, so super fun, but not really true 3D, or sorry, true virtual reality. Okay. I would also argue that this is not a natural gesture because you don't, in real life, if I'm turning my head, I don't pull things. I think I'm allowed to hook it up to my camera or to my phone. You can put it on a phone, and I think you're allowed to do motion gestures like that. But anyway, interesting stuff. All right, the last thing we'll talk about in terms of just what you can do is what's called principles of action. And principles of action is this idea of user agency. What it means is that I should be able to interact with the world. In other words, like if I'm in a world and it's 3D, like let's say I'm in a world, like I don't know, let's say I'm in, let's go back to that movie. Let's just pretend for the sake of argument that I can move forward, backwards, left and right in this this VR space world. Okay. Let's just pretend that that's a possibility. You know, if if me touching things doesn't, or if I hit a button and nothing happens, or like let's just say there's like, I don't know, maybe there's an asteroid, there's a rock there, and I touch it but I can't grab it or hold it, everything's like locked into place, you know what I mean? You have to have some sort of agency, which means to be able to make decisions and have effects on things. If all you can really do in the world is like walk around and kind of look at it like it's a sort of 3D dollhouse or something like that, that's not really VR. So the idea is, it's like we should be able to do things and have effect on the world. Okay, so here in this video, called 99 Red Balloons, which is a play off of an 80s song called 99 Left Balloons, what's happening here is there's going to be some balloons being released, and then the user should be able, so there's balloons and they're moving and that's cool and everything. So actually the user is creating the balloons and they're actually able to touch them. And when you touch them, it changes, the way that they move and how they play. And I think you can pop them too. So like that's agency, the ability to do something, principles of action. Okay. So again, that's kind of why something like this 3D video, although cool, it doesn't really count as a true VR experience because, you're not looking at it. You can't really have any agency in it. It's an amusement park ride where you go on a rail and you can look around and things are cool, but that's about what you can do. Okay. So that kind of explains, hopefully it gives a better sense of what virtual reality is as a concept. In the next video, we're going to talk about kind of the history of VR and some of the key players in VR. Okay.